If you're anything like me, you love horror movies, because deep down, you know you're safe. No matter how terrifying the monster is, or how much blood is spilled, you can always comfort yourself with one simple fact. It's just a script. It's not real. But sometimes the script isn't made up. Sometimes the directors are just reenacting a nightmare that real people actually had to live through. And here are some examples, and some of these I have never been able to recover from, so viewer discretion is heavily advised. In 2009, a horror film called Jennifer's Body hit theaters and absolutely flopped, like embarrassingly flopped. But years later, the film got a second life. People actually watched it and realized, oh, this is genuinely good. It became a cult classic, praised for exploring trauma, toxic friendships, and the horrifying things people do to women's bodies in pursuit of what they want. The plot follows Jennifer Check, a popular high school girl played by Megan Fox, who gets taken into the woods by an indie rock band called Low Shoulder. See, the band is desperate for fame. They're nobodies. And they've convinced themselves that if they sacrifice someone to Satan, they'll finally make it big. So they tie Jennifer up. They perform a ritual. They do what they came to do. But here's the twist. Jennifer wasn't actually a virgin. So instead of dying, she becomes possessed by a demon. Now she has to feed on human flesh to survive, and she starts picking off her male classmates one by one. Her best friend Needy, played by Amanda Seyfried, slowly pieces together the horrifying truth and has to figure out how to stop her. The movie ends with Jennifer gone, and Needy locked in an asylum, but not before she tracks down every member of Low Shoulder and makes them pay for what they did. It's dark. It's campy. It's about the monstrous things people do when they're desperate for success. And here's why I'm telling you all this. Because that premise, teenagers performing a sacrifice on a girl, believing it would make their band successful, wasn't invented by a screenwriter. It happened in California in 1995. Her name was Elise Parler. She was a teenager living in Arroyo Grande, a small town on California's central coast. And by all accounts, she was the kind of person who stood out, creative, curious. She had a dramatic flair, designed and sewed her own dresses, the kind of girl with big plans and the energy to chase them. She attended Arroyo Grande High School, same school as three boys named Royce Casey, Jacob DeLashmut, and Joseph Fiorella. Now, these three weren't your typical students. They called themselves cult followers of the thrash metal band Slayer. And I don't mean they had posters on their walls. They had formed their own band, called it Hatred, and Fiorella in particular had become obsessed with Slayer's lyrics. He studied them like scripture. He later admitted the music started to change how he saw the world. And at some point, that obsession twisted into something else entirely. Fiorella approached DeLashmut with an idea. What if, and stay with me here, what if they offered someone up as a sacrifice, a virgin, to Satan? Because in their minds, this wasn't just edgy talk. They genuinely believed that doing this would give them power, that it would make them play harder, faster, that it might even help them go professional. And the girl they chose, Elise Parler. Fiorella later admitted he was obsessed with her. Not in a romantic way, he was obsessed with her, and with what he wanted to do to her. For months, the three of them planned it out. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a split-second decision. They knew exactly what they were going to do, where they'd take her, and what they'd do after. On July 22nd, 1995, they put their plan into action. They approached Elise and told her they were heading to a eucalyptus grove on Nipomo Mesa, just to hang out. She went with them, probably trusting her classmates, not realizing what she was walking into. What happened next? I'm not going to describe in detail. I can't. What I can tell you is that court documents called it one of the most brutal incidents in the history of San Luis Obispo County. None of what they did ended things quickly. It was slow, deliberate, and when it was over, they left her there in a shallow grave and walked away. For 8 months, Elise's family didn't know what had happened to their daughter. 8 months of wondering, 8 months of hoping for answers that wouldn't come, until Royce Casey confessed. He told a clergyman what they'd done. The clergyman contacted police, and Casey led authorities directly to Elise's remains. All three were arrested and charged. They chose Elise specifically because of her appearance, blonde hair, blue eyes, and because they believed she was a virgin, the perfect offering. They were given a sentence of 25 years, 26 years, and life. But the story didn't end with the convictions. Elise's parents, David and Lisanne Parler, filed a lawsuit against Slayer. They argued that songs like Post-Mortem and Dead Skin Mask had influenced the killers, that the lyrics had put ideas in their heads. The lawsuit was thrown out. The judge said there was no legal way to hold a band responsible, asking where you'd even draw the line. Might as well start going through every book on every library shelf. The Palas tried again with a second suit, claiming Slayer had distributed harmful material to minors. That case was dismissed too. And here's the thing, even one of the three admitted the lawsuit missed the point. Jacob de Lachmutte himself said in an interview, "The music is destructive, but that's not why Elise was murdered. She was murdered because Joe was obsessed with her and obsessed with what he wanted to do to her. The obsession came first, the justification came after." As of 2025, 2 of them are out. De Lachmutte was released in July. Casey followed in August. In 2007, a film called Black Water traumatized audiences with a nightmare scenario. A pregnant woman named Grace, her husband Adam, and her younger sister Lee decide to take a fishing tour through the mangrove swamps of northern Australia. What starts as a peaceful boat ride quickly turns into a fight for survival when their boat capsizes and a massive saltwater crocodile drags their guide underwater. The 3 survivors scramble up a nearby tree, and what follows is a grueling battle against nature itself. Adam eventually musters the courage to swim for the overturned boat. He manages to flip it over, but the crocodile takes him before he can escape. The women watch helplessly as the beast devours him that night, just meters away from where they're clinging to the branches. Grace suffers a vicious bite to her thigh while trying to escape, and her condition deteriorates rapidly. By the time Lee finally kills the crocodile with a jammed revolver she pulled from their dead guide's body, it's too late. Grace has bled out in the tree. Lee places her sister's body in the boat and paddles out of the swamp alone. It's the kind of horror that feels almost too cruel to be real. But the true story that inspired it? In some ways it was even worse, because in real life there was no gun. There was no boat to escape in, and the survivors didn't spend one night in that tree. They spent 22 hours, with the crocodile circling below them the entire time, watching, waiting. It's December 21st, 2003. 3 friends, Brett Mann, Sean Blowers, and Ashley McGow, set out on a quad biking trip through the bushland southwest of Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory. Brett is 22. Sean and Ashley are both 19. They've done this 100 times before. Sean knows this land like the back of his hand. He's been camping under these mangrove trees since he was 5 years old. The 3 of them spend the afternoon tearing through the muddy trails near Kangaroo Flats, spraying each other with red dirt, racing past eucalyptus trees, the gravel crunching beneath their tires. By around 4:30 in the afternoon, they're caked in mud. So they park their bikes near the Finnis River and walk down to the bank to rinse off. Now, what they don't realize is that recent cyclones have swollen the river to 5 times its normal size. The current is deceptively strong, and in these conditions, the territory of saltwater crocodiles expands dramatically. Brett wades out just a little further than the others. The sandy riverbed shifts beneath his feet, and suddenly the current sweeps his legs out from under him. He's being carried downstream. Sean and Ashley don't hesitate. They dive in after him. They manage to get in front of Brett, staying within arm's reach, guiding him back toward the bank. For a moment, it seems like everything's going to be okay. That's when Ashley sees it. She screams out, "Croc! Croc! I'm not joking, there's a croc! Head for a tree, get out of the water!" Sean swims for the nearest tree and pulls himself up into the first fork of branches. He reaches down and helps Ashley up. They turn around, scanning the murky water for Brett. They call out to him, no response, no splashing, no screaming, nothing. 2 minutes later, the crocodile surfaces, and Brett is in its jaws, face down, motionless. The 4-meter beast just floats there, holding the body, looking directly at them. Sean would later describe it as the crocodile showing Brett off to them. Then it slips back under the water and disappears. 5 minutes later, it's back, circling the base of their tree, bobbing up every so often, still hungry. As night falls, the darkness swallows everything. Sean and Ashley can't see their own hands in front of their faces. The temperature drops. Rain starts pelting them, icy, relentless. The small tree sways in the wind, and they have to grip the branches with everything they have just to stay upright. They take turns keeping each other awake, because if one of them dozes off for even a second and loses their grip, they're dead. At some point during the night, Sean tries to climb higher to get more stable. He slips. He plunges into the cold black water below. He scrambles back up the tree within seconds, heart pounding, limbs shaking, narrowly escaping with his life. The crocodile is still out there. They can't see it anymore, but they know it's watching. Ashley moves down so they can huddle together for warmth. They check in with each other constantly, whispering to confirm the other is still awake, still holding on. The hours drag by in complete darkness. The only sounds are the rain, the wind, and the occasional ripple of water below. Back in Darwin, their friends start getting worried around 7:30 that evening, the time the three were supposed to return. A search party heads out and finds the abandoned car and empty trailer, but no sign of Brett, Sean, or Ashley. When dawn finally breaks, a full-scale rescue operation is launched, but the terrain is brutal. The flooding has turned everything into an impassable mess. Progress is painfully slow. Then, at around 10 a.m., Sean and Ashley hear voices nearby. It's Wayne Mitchell, a family friend, accompanied by police. The survivors start screaming, warning them not to enter the water. Sean still has eyes on the crocodile. The rescue team realizes they need to move fast. The river is still rising. Swimming to shore isn't an option, and getting a boat out there would take too long. So they call in a helicopter, a 15-seat Super Puma, the kind normally used to fly crews to offshore oil rigs. As it approaches the tree, the captain realizes just how fragile their perch really is. The wind from the rotors sends the top branch of the tree flying into the water. If they get any closer, they might blow the survivors right into the river. They abort that approach. Instead, a paramedic named Ellis and the captain, McPhee, are lowered onto a tiny island in the middle of the river with an inflatable life raft. The plan is to paddle out to the tree and bring them back. One problem: there are no oars. McPhee improvises with rubber diving flippers. The current fights them the entire way. The helicopter uses its downdraft to push them in the right direction while the men grab at vegetation to pull themselves along. Nothing but a thin piece of rubber between them and the crocodile still lurking somewhere beneath the surface. When they finally reach the tree, it takes some coaxing to get Sean and Ashley to let go of the branches and drop into the raft. After everything they've been through, the idea of being back on the water is almost unthinkable, but they do it. And by 3 p.m., they're back in Darwin, being treated at the hospital. Physically, they're fine. Mentally, that's another story. Search teams went out daily after that, even on Christmas Day, trying to recover Brett's body. But Cyclone Debbie had caused the river to rise another 2 meters. Trees were being torn apart. Debris was swept out to sea. It was sometimes too dangerous to even search by boat. About a week later, a parks ranger shot a 3.8-meter crocodile near the site where Brett disappeared. It was presumed to be the one responsible, though no one can say for certain. Brett's body was never found. His parents divorced and moved away after losing their son. The survivors rarely speak publicly about what happened, but every year, on December 21st, Ashley, Sean, their friends, and Brett's family return to the place where he died. They go down to the river. They say a few words. They play some music. Afterward, they have a barbecue and a couple of drinks, the way Brett would have wanted. Last anyone checked, Sean still lives in the area. He runs the family business cleaning swimming pools, and he still asks customers to remove any inflatable crocodile toys from the pool before he arrives. Ashley remains deeply affected by the trauma. McPhee and Ellis were awarded for their bravery during the rescue. And the tragedy didn't just inspire Blackwater, it also inspired the 2007 film Rogue, another crocodile horror movie. Most crocodile attacks in Australia happen because people ignore the warning signs, swim where they shouldn't, or underestimate the danger. But this one was different. Brett, Sean, and Ashley weren't being reckless. They were just washing mud off their clothes in a river they'd been to countless times before. They'd never seen a crocodile there in all their years of camping and racing nearby. Sometimes tragedy strikes in a way where it wouldn't be reasonable for anyone to have done anything differently. And sometimes the people left behind never fully recover. In 2022, Netflix released The Good Nurse, a thriller that left audiences disturbed in a way few crime films manage. Eddie Redmayne plays Charles Cullen, a soft-spoken, experienced ICU nurse who befriends Amy Lochran, a single mother struggling with an undiagnosed heart condition she's desperately hiding from her employer. Amy, played by Jessica Chastain, needs to keep working just 4 more months to qualify for health insurance that could save her life. Charlie discovers her secret and promises to help her through the night shifts. They become close friends. He's gentle, empathetic, someone she trusts completely. But then elderly patients start passing away unexpectedly. Detectives Danny Baldwin and Tim Braun notice something's wrong. An 84-year-old woman named Anna Martinez was reported 7 weeks after her passing, long after her body had been cremated. When they dig deeper, they find insulin administered to non-diabetic patients. decreased C-peptide levels, things that don't make sense. The hospital administration stonewalls them at every turn. They're more concerned with liability than answers. Baldwin fixates on Charlie, but Amy defends him. She doesn't want to believe her friend could be responsible. Then another patient suffers a seizure and doesn't make it. Amy discovers puncture marks in IV bags. She contacts an old colleague who worked with Charlie at a previous hospital and learns that during his time there, the ward experienced numerous unexplained passings, many involving insulin. Amy finally alerts the detectives. They arrest Charlie, but he won't confess on record. So Amy volunteers to talk to him, wearing a wire. She has a warm conversation with her friend and asks him to tell the truth. After some deliberation, Charlie looks at her and says simply, "I did it." When Amy asks why, his answer chills her to the bone. "They didn't stop me." The film ends with a text epilogue revealing Charlie was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences for 29 confirmed cases, though the actual number could be as high as 400. It's a haunting portrait of institutional failure and betrayal of trust. But what the film couldn't fully capture was just how long the nightmare really lasted, and how many times Charles Cullen was allowed to walk away. Charles Edmund Cullen was born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey, the youngest of 8 children. His father passed away when Charles was only 7 months old. His mother, a war bride from England, raised him in poverty. Cullen would later describe his childhood as miserable, claiming he was constantly bullied. At around 9 years old, he made the first of many attempts to end his own life by drinking chemicals from a chemistry set. When he was 17, his mother was lost in a car accident. The following year, Cullen enlisted in the United States Navy. He served aboard the submarine USS Woodrow Wilson, operating the vessel's Poseidon missiles, but was hazed and bullied by his fellow crewmen. One day, his leading petty officer found him seated at the missile controls, wearing a surgical gown, mask, and gloves instead of his uniform. Cullen never explained why. He was eventually discharged in 1984 after multiple attempts to end his own life. Shortly after, Cullen enrolled in nursing school. He graduated in 1987 and began working at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. That same year, he married and had his first child. From the outside, it looked like Charles Cullen was building a normal life. But on June 11, 1988, less than a year into his nursing career, his first victim didn't survive after receiving a lethal overdose of intravenous medication at St. Barnabas. Over the next several months, more patients under Cullen's care experienced similar fates. An AIDS patient was given an overdose of insulin, then another, and another. In January 1992, the hospital began investigating contaminated IV bags, but before they could take action, Cullen resigned and moved on. And that became the pattern. For the next 16 years, Charles Cullen moved through 9 hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. At Warren Hospital, a 91-year-old woman told her son that Cullen had injected her with something. She died the next day. At Hunterdon Medical Center, 5 patients died from digoxin overdoses between January and September 1996. Hospital records from that period were later destroyed. At Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, an innocent nurse was blamed and fired for a death Cullen caused. At St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, at least 5 patients died under his care over 3 years, and 2 others barely survived. Each time suspicions arose, the same thing happened. The hospital would investigate quietly, Cullen would resign, and they'd let him go with a neutral reference rather than report him. They feared lawsuits, they worried about liability, so they passed the problem to the next facility. In June 2002, 7 of Cullen's co-workers at St. Luke's alerted the district attorney that they suspected he'd used drugs to harm patients. Investigators never looked into Cullen's past. The case was dropped 9 months later for lack of evidence. In September 2002, Cullen began working at Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. By mid-2003, at least 13 patients under his care had experienced unexplained deaths. Somerset began noticing something strange. Cullen was accessing the computerized records of patients who weren't assigned to him. He was requesting medications his patients hadn't been prescribed. In July 2003, the executive director of the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System warned Somerset officials that suspicious overdoses indicated an employee was harming patients, but Somerset didn't act immediately. By October, Cullen had taken the lives of at least 5 more patients. When a patient passed away from low blood sugar in October 2003, Somerset finally alerted the New Jersey State Police. That patient would be Charles Cullen's final victim. On December 12, 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested at a restaurant. 2 days later, he admitted to homicide detectives Dan Baldwin and Tim Braun that he had ended the lives of as many as 40 patients over his 16-year career. Just like in the movie, it was Amy Lochran who helped bring him down. The real Amy agreed to wear a wire and speak with Cullen after his arrest, convincing him to confess on record. In April 2004, Cullen pleaded guilty to 13 murders and 2 attempted murders. Over the following months, he pleaded guilty to additional cases. During one hearing, he repeatedly interrupted the proceedings by taunting the judge, chanting, "Your Honor, you need to step down." He was eventually restrained and gagged. On March 2, 2006, Cullen was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences in New Jersey. He will not be eligible for parole until June 10, 2403. So why did he do it? Cullen told investigators he had overdosed patients to spare them suffering, that he couldn't bear to witness attempts at saving their lives. But that explanation doesn't hold up. Many of his victims weren't terminal. Some had been expected to recover fully before Cullen intervened. Perhaps the most haunting part of Charles Cullen's story isn't what he did. It's what he said to Amy in that interrogation room. "They didn't stop me." And he was right. For 16 years, hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania suspected Charles Cullen of harming patients and let him resign quietly rather than report him. At the time, neither state required healthcare facilities to report suspicious behavior by medical workers. Employers feared lawsuits. There was no legal framework to discover a nurse's previous employment history. Researchers believe Charles Cullen may have harmed as many as 400 patients during his career. Most cases can't be confirmed due to destroyed or incomplete records. Prompted by the Cullen case, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and 35 other states adopted new laws requiring hospitals to report serious preventable events and maintain disciplinary records for at least 7 years. Amy Lochran underwent the heart surgery she needed and now lives in Florida with her daughters and grandchildren. Charles Cullen will never leave prison. But for the families of his victims, many of whom will never even know what really happened to their loved ones, that's cold comfort. Because the question that haunts this case isn't just how one man could do something so terrible for so long, it's how so many people suspected the truth and let him keep moving from hospital to hospital anyway. In 2023, director J.A. Bayona brought one of history's most harrowing survival stories to the screen in Society of the Snow. The film follows a Uruguayan rugby team whose chartered flight crashes into the remote Andes Mountains on October 13, 1972. 29 people survive the initial impact, but they're stranded at over 12,000 feet in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with no equipment, no cold weather gear, and virtually no food. As the days stretch on and temperatures plummet to negative 30 degrees Celsius at night, the survivors face an impossible reality. There's no vegetation this high, no animals, nothing to sustain them. And when their meager supplies run out, they're forced to make a decision that will haunt them for the rest of their lives: to consume those who didn't survive, or face certain doom themselves. The film doesn't shy away from the horror of their situation. It shows the avalanche that buries the fuselage while they sleep, the desperate attempts to signal rescue planes that fly directly overhead, the agonizing choice between their Catholic faith and their will to live, and finally, the last-ditch effort by 2 survivors to climb out of the mountains on their own. A journey the film portrays as their only hope. It's almost too brutal to believe anyone could endure. But what the film couldn't fully capture was just how terrifyingly wrong everything went from the very beginning, and how close all of them came to never being found at all. October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 departs Montevideo carrying 45 passengers and crew, members of the Old Christians Club rugby team, along with their families and supporters. They're heading to Santiago, Chile, for a match. It's supposed to be routine, but as the aircraft crosses the Andes, clouds obscure the mountains below. The co-pilot, still in training, radios Santiago believing they've reached their turning point. He requests permission to descend. Air traffic control authorizes the descent to 11,500 feet. What no one realizes is that the aircraft is still deep in the Andes. The co-pilot has miscalculated their position by nearly 40 miles. The plane drops rapidly through the clouds. Then, without warning, the rugby players see mountains rising directly in front of them. Someone later describes it as a black ridge rising dead ahead. The ground collision alarm screams through the cabin. For a moment, it seems like they might clear the ridge. Then the tail section clips the mountain at 13,800 feet, tearing the entire rear of the aircraft away. A second collision shears off the right wing, then the left. The fuselage careens down a glacier at 220 miles per hour, tumbling nearly half a mile before slamming into a snowbank. 12 people don't survive the first day, 33 do, but many are critically injured. They fashion the wreckage into a crude shelter barely 8 feet by 10 feet, 28 people crammed together in freezing darkness. Over the next few days, 5 more passengers succumb to their injuries. The 28 remaining survivors know rescue is coming. It has to be. On the second day, 11 aircraft sweep the area. The survivors hear the planes overhead. Some pass directly over the crash site. They try to write SOS on the fuselage with lipstick, but the white wreckage is invisible against the snow. The planes see nothing. Days pass, then a week. The survivors ration their meager supplies: 8 chocolate bars, a few jars of jam, some candy, a tin of almonds. One passenger eats a single chocolate-covered peanut over 3 days. Then, on the 11th day, they get a small transistor radio working. They gather around, desperate for news, and that's when they hear it. The search has been called off. The authorities have declared there are no survivors. For a moment, there's only silence inside the fuselage. Then someone begins to cry, but one survivor, Gustavo Nikolic, refuses to let despair win. He climbs to the opening of the shelter and shouts, "Hey boys, there's some good news. They've called off the search." Someone screams back at him, "Why the hell is that good news?" Nikolic's response is simple, "Because it means we're going to get out of here on our own." But there's a problem. The food is gone. At 12,000 feet, in temperatures that plunge to negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit at night, the human body burns thousands of calories just to stay warm. The survivors can feel themselves wasting away. They try eating leather torn from belts and shoes. They eat the cotton stuffing from seats. It makes them violently ill. There is nothing else. And outside, in the snow, are the bodies of their friends, their teammates, their family members, preserved by the cold. The survivors wrestle with a decision that tears at their souls. They're devout Catholics. Most of them have known each other since childhood. The idea of consuming human flesh feels like a violation of everything they believe in, but the alternative is certain death. One of the medical students, Roberto Canessa, finally makes the first move. He cuts a small piece of flesh with a shard of broken glass. He swallows it. Others follow his example over the next few days. They dry the meat in the sun. They pray for forgiveness. Some compare it to the Eucharist, the body given so that others might live. It's the only reason they survive past the second week. On the 16th night, October 29th, disaster strikes again. An avalanche. Snow and ice pour through the opening, filling the fuselage in seconds. The survivors are buried alive, trapped in complete darkness. When it's over, 8 more people are gone. Among them is the rugby team captain and Liliana Methol, a 34-year-old mother of 4 who had been caring for the injured like a saint. One of them punches a hole through the cockpit window to let in air. For 3 days, a blizzard rages outside. The survivors are trapped inside the snow-filled wreckage with the bodies of their newly deceased friends. When the storm finally passes, they dig their way out. 19 people remain, and they all understand the same thing now. No one is coming to save them. If they want to survive, they'll have to walk out of these mountains themselves. Several of them scout the area and find the tail section about a mile away. Inside are heavy batteries that power the aircraft's systems. If they can get the batteries back and power the plane's radio, maybe they can send an SOS. It takes days of effort, but when they finally get everything wired up, nothing happens. The radio is dead. Another hope extinguished. By early December, 3 more survivors have passed away. 16 remain. They make a decision. 3 of them will attempt to climb out of the mountains. They fashion a sleeping bag from insulation, save extra rations of meat, and wait for the weather to improve. On December 12th, 60 days after the crash, Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin begin their climb toward the ridge on the western edge of the glacier. From there, they believe, they'll see the green valleys of Chile. The climb is brutal. They have no ropes, no harnesses, no climbing experience. It takes them 3 full days to reach the top of the ridge. When Parrado finally pulls himself over the summit at nearly 15,000 feet, he's expecting to see rescue, civilization, the end of their nightmare. Instead, he sees mountains, endless mountains, snow-covered peaks stretching in every direction. Not a hint of green anywhere. When Canessa joins him at the summit and sees the same view, he says only 2 words: "We're dead." But Parrado refuses to give up. In the distance, barely visible, he can see two peaks that aren't covered in snow, and below them is a valley. It's their only chance. Byzantine will return to the crash site, so the other two have enough food to keep going. For 7 more days, the two men descend through the mountains. They have no map, no compass, no idea where they're going. They just follow the valley. They're starving, exhausted beyond measure. Canessa has lost half his body weight since the crash, but they keep moving. On the 9th day, they reach the snow line. Then they see something that makes them stop. A tin can, discarded on the ground. Signs of human life. The next day, they spot cattle grazing in the distance. And then, on the far side of a river, they see 3 men on horseback. Parado screams for help, but the roar of the river drowns out his voice. One of the men shouts back a single word, "Tomorrow?" The next morning, the man returns. He throws a note across the river. Parado writes his reply on the back. "I come from an airplane that crashed in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. I have a wounded friend up there. In the plane, there are still 14 injured people. We need to get out of here quickly and we don't know how. We don't have any food. We are very weak. When are you going to come to get us? Please, we can't even walk. Where are we?" The man, a Chilean cattle herder named Sergio Catalan, reads the message. He signals that he understands. Then he rides west for 10 hours to reach the nearest village with a phone. On December 22nd, 1972, 70 days after the crash, 2 Chilean helicopters arrive at the crash site, guided by Parado from the air. The pilots are stunned. They can't believe anyone survived. The helicopters can only carry half the survivors on the first trip due to altitude and weight restrictions. 4 rescuers volunteer to stay behind with the remaining 8 for one final night on the mountain. The next morning, the last survivors are lifted to safety. 72 days, negative 30-degree nights, an avalanche, starvation, and a decision that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Of the 45 people on that flight, only 16 made it home. When the world learned what the survivors had done to stay alive, the reaction was mixed. Some called them heroes, others condemned them. The survivors themselves struggled for years with what they'd been forced to do. But Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa had walked for 10 days through some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth. They'd climbed nearly 15,000 feet and descended more than 33 miles through the Andes without equipment, training, or any certainty they'd find help. And they'd saved 14 lives in the process. Later, when asked how they did it, Parado's answer was simple. "We may have been walking to our ends, but I would rather walk to meet it than wait for it to come to me." Sometimes, survival isn't about waiting for rescue. It's about refusing to give up, even when every rational part of you says there's no hope left. The crash site still sits at 12,000 feet in the Andes, marked now by a memorial. And every year, the survivors who remain return to that spot to remember the 29 who didn't make it home. The ones who gave everything so that others might live. In 2003, South Korean director Bong Joon-ho released Memories of Murder, a crime thriller that would become one of the most acclaimed films of the 21st century. It follows 2 detectives in 1986, Park Do-man, a local cop who claims he can spot criminals by looking into their eyes, and Seo Tae-yoon, a methodical detective from Seoul, as they investigate a series of brutal attacks on women in the rural town of Hwaseong. The film shows their investigation unraveling in real time. Evidence is mishandled. Suspects are beaten into false confessions. Forensic technology barely exists. They have a surviving victim who describes her attacker. Soft hands, mid-20s, ordinary looking. They identify a suspect who fits the profile perfectly. They send evidence abroad for DNA testing because South Korea doesn't have the technology yet. And when the results come back, they're inconclusive. Not a match, but not ruled out either. The case goes cold. The film ends 17 years later in 2003. Detective Park, now a businessman with a family, returns to the spot where the first victim was found. A young girl tells him she just saw a man standing in that exact location, staring at the ground, as if remembering something he did there long ago. Park asks what the man looked like. The girl says he looked completely ordinary. So ordinary she can't describe a single distinguishing feature. Park turns and stares directly into the camera. The look on his face says everything. He's still out there. It's a haunting ending. One of the most unsettling moments in cinema. But what audiences didn't know in 2003, what no one knew for another 16 years, was that the man really was still out there. And the truth, when it finally emerged, would be even more devastating than the film could have imagined. September 15th, 1986. Hwaseong, a rural area about 40 miles south of Seoul. An elderly woman doesn't come home after visiting her daughter. 4 days later, her body is discovered in a pasture, bound and... A month later, another young woman disappears after getting off a bus. 3 days later, her body is found in a canal, bound, with her own clothing, signs of a violent assault. In December, another woman vanishes from right in front of her house. The same pattern. Then another, and another. The victims are all women, found in rural areas just outside town. They're attacked on quiet roads, often after getting off buses late at night. In some cases, they're taken from their own homes while they sleep. By 1987, the local police realize they're dealing with something unprecedented: South Korea's first confirmed serial killer. The country has never seen anything like this before. There are no protocols, no databases, no specialized units for this kind of crime. The investigation becomes the largest in South Korean history. Over the next several years, more than 2 million man-days will be spent searching for the person responsible. Over 21,000 suspects will be questioned. Fingerprints are taken from over 40,000 people. And during the investigation, police noticed something chilling. The attacks always happen on rainy nights, and many of the victims were wearing red. Panic spreads through Hwaseong. Some female police officers volunteer to wear red clothing on rainy nights, hoping to draw the attacker out. But every time they set up surveillance, the next victim is found somewhere else, somewhere the police aren't watching. In September 1988, police finally get a break. A bus driver and conductor provide enough detail for a suspect sketch. Mid-20s, thin build, about 5 feet 6 inches, short, sporty haircut, no distinguishing marks, soft hands. Survivors who escaped their attacks confirm the description. The man is unremarkable, average height, thin, ordinary face, nothing that would make him stand out in a crowd. But then, a few weeks later, a teenager is attacked while sleeping in her own bedroom. The horror of that detail sends shockwaves through the community. Within days, police arrest a 22-year-old man named Yoon Sung-yo. During interrogation, he confesses. Forensic analysis suggests a 40% match with evidence from the scene. It's not definitive, but it's something. Yoon is convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The police announced this particular attack was a copycat crime, but the original attacker is still out there. In April 1991, another elderly woman is found on a hillside, the 10th confirmed victim. After that, the attacks suddenly stop. No one knows why. Eventually, the case goes cold. Detectives retire. Files are boxed up and stored away. The statute of limitations, 15 years at the time, starts ticking down. In 2003, Bong Joon-ho's film reignites public interest in the case. In 2006, the statute of limitations expires. Legally, even if the perpetrator is ever identified, he can never be prosecuted. At least 4 men who were questioned as suspects reportedly took their own lives in the 1990s, unable to bear the suspicion and alleged mistreatment during interrogation. Yoon Sung-yo serves nearly 20 years before being released on parole in 2009. He's always maintained his innocence, claiming police beat him into a false confession. The years stretch on. 2010, 2015, 2019, the Hwaseong case becomes a piece of history, a mystery that will never be solved. And then, in September 2019, everything changes. Police make a stunning announcement. They've identified a suspect in the Hwaseong case. His name is Lee Chun-jae, and he's already in prison. Investigators had recently begun re-examining old evidence using modern DNA technology. When they tested clothing from one of the victims, they found a match in the National DNA database. The match led them to a 56-year-old man serving a life sentence in Busan. He'd been in prison since 1994 for killing his 18-year-old sister-in-law. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Lee initially denies everything. But on October 2, 2019, he confesses, not just to the 10 Hwaseong cases, to 14 in total, and to more than 30 other violent assaults. Lee describes the crimes in detail, details that were never made public, that only the perpetrator would know. And in one confession, he describes the September 1988 attack on the teenager, the crime for which Yoon Sung-yo was falsely convicted and spent nearly 20 years in prison. The realization hits investigators like a freight train. They imprisoned an innocent man. Yoon's confession had been coerced. The forensic evidence was questionable at best, possibly falsified. In December 2019, 8 of the original investigators are charged with abuse of power, illegal detention, and falsifying documents. On December 17, 2020, Yoon Sung-yeol is formally acquitted. After 31 years, he's finally exonerated. But for Lee Chun-jae, there will be no additional punishment. The statute of limitations expired in 2006, even with DNA evidence, even with his confession, even with 14 confirmed victims. He cannot be prosecuted for the Hwaseong crimes. He'll serve out his life sentence for his sister-in-law's case, but legally, the other cases are closed, unprosecuted. So who was Lee Chun-jae? He was born in Hwaseong in 1963. He served in the military as a tank driver and was discharged in January 1986, just 8 months before the first attack. Police later said Lee had weak self-esteem but felt a sense of accomplishment for the first time during his military service. When he returned to civilian life, he struggled. He began working construction jobs. He married in 1992 and had a son, but he was a violent man who mistreated his family. Between 1986 and 1991, Lee was living and working in Hwaseong. He knew the terrain. He knew the bus routes, the isolated roads, the places where someone could disappear without being seen. He was, by all accounts, utterly unremarkable. Average height, ordinary appearance, nothing that stood out. Exactly as the surviving victims had described. Exactly as the young girl in the film's final scene said, so ordinary she couldn't describe him. The attacks stopped in 1991, but not because Lee had been caught or moved away. He simply stopped. And then, in 1994, he committed one final horrific crime against his own sister-in-law, the crime that finally put him behind bars. When asked why he confessed in 2019, Lee said he didn't want to face public condemnation if he ever sought parole. But the families of his victims don't get that choice. They don't get justice. They don't get a trial. Because of a legal technicality, the man who terrorized an entire region for 5 years can never be held accountable for those crimes. In 2007, South Korea extended the statute of limitations for serious crimes to 25 years. In 2015, they abolished it entirely. But the change wasn't retroactive. The Hwaseong investigation, 2 million man-days of work, over 21,000 suspects questioned, over 40,000 fingerprints taken, ultimately solved nothing. Because by the time technology caught up, it was too late. The final scene of Memories of Murder has haunted audiences for over 20 years now. Detective Park staring into the camera. The unspoken question, is he watching this movie right now? In 2003, when the film was released, Lee Chun-jae was 9 years into his life sentence. It's entirely possible he heard about the film. Maybe he even saw it. Maybe he recognized himself in it. The case is officially closed now. But for the families of the 14 victims, there's no closure. Only the knowledge that the man who destroyed their lives is alive, comfortable in a prison cell, beyond the reach of justice for the crimes that terrorized a nation. And somewhere in the fields outside Hwaseong, the places where those women were found over 3 decades ago remain. Quiet, ordinary, unmarked, just like the man who left them there. In 2010, Australian director Andrew Trocchi released The Reef, a survival horror film that critics called the scariest shark movie since Jaws. The story follows 5 friends sailing a yacht to Indonesia when they strike a coral reef and capsize in open water. Stranded miles from land, 4 of them decide to swim for a nearby island, while one stays with the overturned hull. As they make their way through the water, they spot the carcass of a sea turtle, its head cleanly bitten off. Then they see the fin. A massive great white shark begins stalking them. It circles, it brushes past them.
Okay, it's a shark. How big? It's big. It's all right, come together.
And one by one, it takes them. By the time rescue arrives the next day, only one person is still alive. The others are gone, vanished into the depths of the Indian Ocean during a nightmare that lasted barely 24 hours. The film terrified audiences. The use of real shark footage instead of CGI made it feel visceral and authentic. Viewers left theaters genuinely shaken, grateful they'd never have to face that situation themselves. But as the opening credits state, this story is based on true events, and the real version, what actually happened off the coast of Australia in 1983, was far worse than anything the film dared to show. July 22nd, 1983. The port city of Townsville in northeastern Australia. The new venture, a 14-meter prawn trawler, prepares to depart for the rich fishing grounds between Townsville and the Great Barrier Reef. The crew is small, just 3 people. Ray Boundy, 27 years old, is the captain. Young for the role, but he's already a father of 2 and an experienced seaman who knows these waters well. His deckhand is Dennis Murphy, nicknamed Smurf by his friends, a 23-year-old from Brisbane with a reputation as a bit of a drifter, always chasing the next adventure. And the ship's cook is Linda Horton, just 21, the youngest of the trio. The work is demanding. Most days they rest or do maintenance, but when dusk falls they cast their nets and work through the night hauling in prawns. It means weeks at sea, away from family and friends. Long, exhausting hours, rough conditions, but the money's good. And for young people trying to make their way in the world, it's a living. As they prepare to leave the dock that Friday evening, Linda, or Lindy, as her friends call her, seems unusually hesitant. She's watching the wind pick up across the water. She's always been superstitious, and something about the weather doesn't feel right to her. Her parents notice. They try to convince her to stay home, to skip this trip, but Lindy has a stubborn streak. She's already committed. She won't back out now, no matter what they say. The new venture casts off and heads out toward the Coral Sea. The sooner they get to work, the sooner they can return home. Lindy doesn't realize yet that she'll never see her parents again. The wind that unsettled Lindy refuses to die down. By Sunday evening, waves are building. The small trawler pitches and rolls in heavy seas as the crew tries to keep working. Then, sometime after midnight, a massive wave hits them. Dennis is on deck when it happens. He dives into the water as the boat goes over. Ray and Lindy are trapped in the wheelhouse as the new venture capsizes, rolling completely upside down. They fight their way out through the flooding cabin and surface alongside Dennis, gasping for air. The 3 of them pull themselves onto the overturned hull and assess the situation. They're roughly 90 kilometers from Townsville, about 45 kilometers from the nearest land, Palm Islands. There's no radio, no way to call for help. The boat is sinking. Items from the wreck float around them in the darkness. A surfboard, a life ring, styrofoam boxes used for storing prawns, a beer cooler. They gather everything they can and lash it together with rope, creating a crude raft. When the sun rises Monday morning, they can't see land in any direction, but they know there are reefs to the east. That's their best chance. The 3 of them hold onto their makeshift raft and start paddling toward what they hope is safety. It's July, winter in the southern hemisphere, but the water in the Coral Sea stays warm, around 23 degrees Celsius. They won't freeze. The air temperature is mild enough that sunburn might not be catastrophic. These are small mercies. Progress is agonizingly slow, but they try to stay positive. They encourage each other. They keep moving. All through Monday, they paddle east. The rough seas gradually dismantle their raft piece by piece, but they keep what they can and push forward. By Monday night, the seas have finally calmed. They still have the surfboard, the life ring, a few pieces of styrofoam. It's enough to keep them afloat. That's when they see it. A large shape moving through the water, a fin cutting the surface about 15 feet away. Ray recognizes it immediately. A tiger shark.
Okay, it's a shark. How big? It's big. It's all right, come together.
Big, maybe 15 feet long. He's an experienced fisherman. He's seen sharks before. He knows that most of the time, if you don't provoke them, they'll move on. So he tells the others to stay calm. Don't splash. Don't make sudden movements. The shark circles them slowly. Then it disappears beneath the surface. Ray, Smurf, and Lindy exchange nervous glances but keep paddling. Maybe it's gone. Maybe they're safe. Then Ray feels something brush against the surfboard under his legs. Before he can react, there's a quick, sharp pain in his left knee. Instinctively, he kicks out with his other leg, hard. The shark releases him and backs off. It was just a test bite. Sharks often investigate unfamiliar objects this way, using their jaws to determine what something is. Ray's kick interrupted the process. The shark vanishes into the darkness. For 10 long minutes, nothing happens. Ray, Smurf, and Lindy tread water in silence, scanning the black ocean around them, hearts pounding. Then, suddenly, the fin reappears. Closer this time. It dips below the surface, and Dennis screams, "He's got my leg! The bastard's got my leg!" Ray shouts at him to kick. It worked before, maybe it'll work again. But Smurf is kicking blindly into the water and it's doing nothing. His foot only hits the shark's hard jaw as it holds him firmly by the calf. Then, with a sudden violent yank, Dennis is pulled under. He surfaces a moment later, gasping, but something's wrong. The water around them is darkening, turning red. Ray and Lindy realize with horror, his leg is gone. They try to think. A tourniquet. They need a tourniquet. But they have nothing. No rope, no cloth, nothing to stop the bleeding. The shark's still out there. They can see the fin circling. Dennis knows he's done for. He looks at Ray and Lindy, both of them frozen in shock, and makes a decision. "You bolt," he tells them. "Gather in all the stuff. Leave me." Before they can argue, he pushes off and swims away, deliberately swimming in the opposite direction, trying to draw the shark away from his friends. Ray and Lindy hesitate for just a second. Then they start swimming toward the reef. With one terrible glance backward, they see the shark turn. It lifts Dennis partway out of the water. They look away and keep swimming. Lindy is screaming. She can't stop. The shock of what just happened has completely overwhelmed her, and Ray worries she might not recover from it. He's reeling too, barely holding himself together, but he forces himself to focus. He grabs her, shakes her, tells her they owe it to Dennis to survive. Slowly, the worst of the panic subsides. She's able to keep moving. Ray calculates that if they maintain their pace, they'll reach the reef by morning. He keeps talking to her, trying to keep her spirits up, trying to keep his own spirits up. Sunrise is still hours away. Around 4 a.m., the shark comes back. Ray and Lindy watch it approach. There's something unnervingly familiar about the way it moves. They're almost certain it's the same one, the same shark that's been following them all night. They're exhausted, emotionally shattered, physically drained from swimming for hours. All they can do is hold hands and watch as it circles them. Then, almost casually, it angles toward Lindy. She's sitting in the life ring, too tired to even kick. The shark grabs her around the arms and chest. She lets out one small sound, barely a whimper. Ray is still holding her hand as the shark shakes her violently, 3 or 4 times. Then she's still. Ray Boundy is alone now. He's been in the water for more than 30 hours. He's watched both of his crewmates taken right in front of him. He's completely numb, beyond fear, beyond grief. There's only one thought in his mind now: survive. He can see Lodestone Reef in the distance. Not far now, he keeps swimming. The shark reappears. It watches him from a short distance, keeping pace. Ray can barely summon the energy to care. He just keeps moving toward the reef. A large wave pushes him closer. With the last of his strength, he scrambles onto the sharp coral and rocks, scraping his skin raw as he pulls himself to safety. For a moment, lying flat on his stomach on the reef, he laughs. Manic, hysterical laughter, relief washing over him in waves. Then the reality hits, and he starts sobbing. Through his tears, he hears something. Rotary blades, a helicopter. At 10:40 a.m. on Tuesday morning, July 26, 1983, a Royal Australian Air Force helicopter winches Ray Boundy up from Lodestone Reef. He's been in the water for 36 hours. His skin is burned and raw. His lips are cracked from dehydration. His hair and beard are bleached white from the sun and salt. He looks like he's been adrift for weeks. In the hospital, he's treated for cuts and exposure. Physically, he'll make a full recovery, but some wounds don't heal. Search and rescue teams scour a 13,000 square kilometer area for days, looking for Dennis Murphy and Linda Horton. They find nothing. The ocean has taken them. In the aftermath, Ray Boundy tells reporters he's going back to sea. "The sea is my life," he says, and he does. Within months, he's in the news again. This time as a hero, rescuing 3 trawlermen whose ship ran aground near where the new venture sank. But whispers follow him. In a small city like Townsville, some people start to speculate. Was there really a shark? Was the story a cover for something else? Only Ray will ever know for certain what happened out there that night. What is certain is that his story isn't unique. Tiger sharks have been involved in multiple disasters off the Queensland coast. In 1977, 3 men were dumped in the water when their boat was destroyed. 2 were taken by a massive tiger shark before the 3rd was rescued. In 1988, a father and his 2 sons were forced into a 4-meter dinghy in rough seas. The father was killed by a shark, then the younger son. The older son was rescued just as 2 enormous tiger sharks, both larger than the dinghy, were ramming his boat. Tiger sharks are apex predators found in tropical waters. They're known for eating almost anything and for scavenging on weak or injured animals. But the idea that they're mindless man-eaters is a myth. Humans aren't their natural prey. Of the 20 confirmed tiger shark incidents in Australian waters since 1983, 15 people survived. Given the size and power of these animals, that survival rate suggests most bites are cases of mistaken identity or warning strikes, not true predatory attacks. In recent years, divers have even formed close bonds with individual tiger sharks, removing hooks from their mouths and interacting peacefully with them. They can be curious, even gentle. But in certain circumstances, like a shipwreck, a hungry tiger shark may see a person at the surface, showing signs of distress as prey. And when that happens, there's little anyone can do. Incredibly, Ray Boundy was shipwrecked again in 1988. This time, he and 2 crewmates abandoned their trawler in rough seas and took to a life raft. As they began to fear history might repeat itself, a search plane spotted them off Great Keppel Island and airlifted them to safety. Whether Ray Boundy is the luckiest or unluckiest sailor alive is up for debate. When the Reef was released in 2011, Ray told the Sunday Mail, "If it is remotely like what happened on that day, it will cause pain." He's retired from prawn trawling now. He works as a curator and ferry operator at Cape Cleveland Lighthouse. His beard is white. He's married with grandchildren. He says he thinks about Smurf and Lindy every day, always grateful he survived, always aware of what his crewmates lost. Dennis Murphy's family took pride in the fact that he died trying to save his friends. A memorial plaque was erected in Townsville in honor of Dennis and Linda. On it are engraved the words, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for friends." The Coral Sea is calm most days now. Fishing boats come and go. Tourists visit the Great Barrier Reef, marveling at its beauty. But 90 kilometers from Townsville, near Lodestone Reef, the water is deep and dark. And somewhere in those depths, the memory of July 1983 still lingers. 2 young people who set out on a routine fishing trip and never came home. And 1 man who survived 36 hours in the water, who watched his friends disappear, and who has carried that weight every day since. Sometimes the ocean gives, and sometimes it takes everything.